Scientists have been listening to the story being told by a man who was born 9,000 years ago. His skull was found in 1996 along the banks of the Columbia River near Kennewick, Washington.
The mud washed away to reveal a human skull with a stone spear point stuck in its hip. This man survived a brutal attack 9,000 years ago, but his real battle started after he was found in 1996. Historians were shocked because his face did not match the people living there today. This one man proved that the first Americans might have come from a completely different place than we were taught in school.
DNA test shows he's actually a direct descendant of this Kennewick man here, and I was just ecstatic. And to have a confirmation with a DNA kit, that's amazing.
If you look a little closer, you find the real story is hidden in a drop of DNA. Riverbank Secret. At first, everyone thought this was a modern crime. The police were called and they brought in a man named James Chatters who knew a lot about bones. They thought maybe someone had been hurt recently and left in the river. But here is where it gets tricky. When James looked at the skull, he saw it was very different. It did not have the traits of modern people in that area. It was long and narrow. It looked more like someone from Europe or Polynesia than a local native person. This was the first big hint that something was not right. The team started digging more and found almost a whole skeleton. The man was about 5 feet 9 inches tall and pretty strong, but his bones showed he had a very hard life. He had broken ribs that had healed and his left arm was hurt badly. The most amazing part was a stone spear point stuck deep in his hip bone. The bone had grown right over the stone, which means he lived for a long time after being hit. Scientists call this a cascade point, and it was the kind of tool used thousands of years ago. To find out the real age, they sent a small piece of bone to a lab. When the results came back, it sent a shock through the world of science. The bones were between 8,300 and 9,300 years old. This man, who people started calling Kennewick Man, was one of the oldest and most complete skeletons ever found in North America. This discovery was a huge deal because it did not fit the story we were told in school. Most folks have no idea that this one man would start a war over who really owns the past. The way he looked was the part that nobody talks about. His face did not look like the native people who live in Washington today. This made scientists wonder if the first people to reach America came in different groups from different places. If he was not related to the local tribes, then where did he come from? This question was about to turn into a massive legal fight that lasted for years. His bones were like a book that had been locked for 9,000 years. Ancient One Battle. As soon as the age of the bones was made public, the local native tribes stepped in. 5 different groups, including the Umatilla and the Yakima, claimed the skeleton was their ancestor. They did not call him Kennewick Man, they called him the Ancient One. They said their stories told them they had been on that land since the beginning of time. To them, digging up his bones and studying them was a huge sign of disrespect. They wanted the government to give the bones back right away so they could bury him with honor. There is a law in the United States called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. This law says that if a skeleton is found on federal land and it is related to a tribe, it has to be given back. The Army Corps of Engineers, who owned the land by the river, decided to give the bones to the tribes. They were going to bury him and stop all the science. But here's the part that trips everyone up. A group of famous scientists sued the government to stop the burial. They argued that because the man looked so different, there was no proof he was related to the modern tribes. This started a 10-year battle in the courts. The scientists wanted to study the bones to learn about the first Americans. They said that history belongs to everyone, not just one group. The tribe said that their religious beliefs should be respected. While the lawyers fought, the bones were locked away in a museum in Seattle. No one was allowed to touch them or look at them. It was like the man had been captured again, this time by paperwork and laws. The scientists eventually won the first round in court in 2004. The judge said the bones were so old that it was impossible to prove a direct link to the tribes just by looking at the shape of the skull. This allowed the scientists to finally do a close study. They spent weeks measuring every inch of the bones. They found out he ate a lot of fish and seals, and he spent a lot of time throwing spears. He was a traveler who had covered hundreds of miles in his life. But even with all this work, the biggest question was still not answered. They still did not know for sure who his family was or where they went. The only way to know the truth was to look inside the bones at his genetic code. But the technology back then was not good enough to get a clean sample from such old bone. They had to wait for the world of science to catch up to the mystery. A tiny fragment of bone held a secret that would change everything. Hidden code discovery. By the year 2015, everything in the world of DNA had changed. Scientists could now map a whole person's history from just a tiny speck of dust. A famous expert from Denmark named Eske Willerslev got permission to try one last time to find the truth. He took a tiny piece of bone from the hand of the skeleton. Everyone was waiting with bated breath to see if the computer would find a match. When you look at the real facts, the results were something no one expected. The DNA proved that the scientists who thought he was European were 100% wrong. The genetic code showed that Kennewick Man was indeed related to modern Native Americans. Even though his skull had a strange shape, his blood did not lie. He was a direct ancestor of the very people who had been fighting to bury him. This was a huge win for the tribes. It proved that their oral stories about being there for thousands of years were actually true. Plain and simple, he was home. But there is a bit of a snag. While he was related to the tribes, he was not an exact match to just one group. His DNA was a bit more like people living in South America or other parts of the coast. This taught scientists that the first people in America were moving around a lot more than we thought. It also showed that human faces change a lot over 9,000 years. Just because he looked different did not mean he was from a different continent. It just meant he was from a very old version of the family. Believe it or not, it gets even weirder. When the scientists looked even deeper into his code, they found something that makes absolutely no sense. They found a ghost. There were pieces of DNA that did not match any humans living today. It was like a hidden message from a group of people who have completely vanished from the earth. This discovery opened up a whole new mystery about who else was living in America 10,000 years ago. The DNA did not just solve a court case, it rewrote the map of human migration. It showed that the first Americans were a complex mix of groups. Some stayed in one place, while others moved thousands of miles. This man had traveled from the coast deep into the heart of Washington state. He carried the history of a whole continent in his cells. The ghost in his DNA was about to lead scientists to a lost world. Vanished People Mystery. This mysterious part of his code is now called Population Y. If you take away all the noise, it is about this. There was a group of humans who reached the Americas a long time ago, but they did not survive as a separate group. They might have been some of the very first people to arrive, even before the ancestors of most modern tribes. When the newer groups arrived, these two groups met and had children. Over thousands of years, the original group was folded into the new one until they disappeared. Kennewick Man had about 2 to 4% of this mystery DNA. That might sound like a tiny bit, but in science it is huge. It is like finding a single word from a lost language in a modern book. Most folks have no idea that there were likely many lost tribes that lived and died in America before history was ever written down. These people built lives, hunted giant animals, and had families. But today they only exist as tiny signals and old bones. This changes the Clovis first idea that we all learned. That old idea said one group of people walked across a land bridge from Siberia and stayed. But when you look at the real facts, it was more like waves of people coming at different times. Some might have come by boat along the coast. Some might have stayed in the north for a long time before moving south. Kennewick Man was part of this messy, beautiful, and complicated story of movement. The part that nobody talks about is what happened to those original people. Did they lose a war? Did they get sick? Or did they just slowly become part of the bigger groups? The DNA does not tell us how they felt or what they said, but it tells us they were there. It makes you wonder how many other people are missing from our history books. Every time we find an old skeleton, we find a new piece of the puzzle that does not fit the old way of thinking. History is not a straight line, it is a giant web of stories that we are just starting to untangle. This one man's bones acted like a key to a door we did not even know was there. The real story of America is much older than anyone dared to dream. Final ground peace. After the DNA results were finished, the fight finally came to an end. The law was clear now. In 2016, the President of the United States signed a special order to give the bones back to the 5 tribes. After 21 years of being in boxes, in labs, and in museums, the ancient one was finally going to rest. In February of 2017, more than 200 members of the tribes gathered at a secret spot. They took the bones and put them back into the earth where they were found. They used traditional blankets and songs to say goodbye to their ancestor. No scientists were allowed to be there and no cameras were allowed to film. The tribes wanted to make sure he would never be dug up again. They did not mark the grave because they wanted him to be part of the river and the land again. To them, the science was over and the spirit was finally at peace. It was a very emotional day for everyone who had fought so hard for him. While everyone was looking over here, something else was happening in the world of archaeology. The lesson of Kennewick Man changed how scientists work. Now they try to work with tribes instead of fighting them. They realize that you can learn a lot more when you listen to the stories of the people who live there today. The discovery of the Ancient One did not just teach us about DNA, it taught us about respect and how to handle the past with care. But the mystery of the first Americans is still wide open. We now know that people were in America much earlier than 15,000 years ago. We have found footprints in New Mexico that might be 20,000 years old. Every time we think we have the answer, a new detail trips everyone up. History is always changing, and that is what makes it so exciting. We are living on top of thousands of years of secrets that are just waiting for the right moment to be found. Are we ready to accept that our history is much older and darker than we thought? Tell us your theories below. If you love this mystery, like and subscribe now.